Elaine here from Society for OldLucan. We would usually be planning our summer events right now and booking you into tours and walks and events. And unfortunately that can't happen right now, but we are able to put up some presentations that we have compiled over the last number of months that you might find interesting, and you can sit back and in the comfort of your own home have a look at what we have learned. Today I'm going to walk you through some information I've compiled about the HermitageShellShock Hospital, which was based in Lucan in the First World War between 1917 and 1919. So this is a great picture. It's part of the South Dublin Library's Local Studies Online collection, and that's free and available to everybody. It covers all manner of topics. There are a number of photos in the presentation from that collection, and this shows the men and nursing staff and volunteers at the Hermitage. The men here are wearing their hospital blues, which was a designated uniform for patients. So many people will be familiar with the prestigious Hermitage Golf Club, which was established in 1905 and sits in the grounds of the Hermitage domain, where there would have been a grand manor house from early 1700s at least. At this time, the clubhouse was in a separate wooden structure on site, and the house was not in use as far as we are aware. As World War I progressed, there was a notable requirement for additional auxiliary hospitals to cater for the injured men returning from the front. And it was the British Red Cross and the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, St. John's Ambulance, who formed a joint war committee to meet this requirement and to aid the war effort. They established and manned auxiliary hospitals across Britain and Ireland, and it was the County Dublin branch headed up by Florence Barrie, who we'll learn a bit more about in the presentation, who established the hospital in around about March 1917. At this time, people were starting to recognise the severe neurological effects of warfare, and it became known that men suffering in that way would benefit from a particular type of care. So shell shock hospitals were opened, and the Hermitage served this purpose. We believe it was the first in Ireland to solely cater for these cases. So the agency involved in the hospital, as mentioned, was the British Red Cross. The Irish Red Cross had not yet been established at this time. And Florence Barrie, the Honourable Florence M. Barrie, lived in Willsbrook, Esker, and she was married to Major Barrie, who himself participated in the war. Interestingly, Florence was born at Bingham, and she was the daughter of the 4th Baron Clanmorris. So there must be some kind of link there to the Lucan-Bingham line. And I'd be interested to learn from any of our local historians. I know some have very detailed knowledge of the peerage side of things. It'd be great to get that information if you can work out the links. Florence had a very strong drive to assist and to do something in terms of the war effort. She also had sons from her previous marriage. She was widowed and they were involved in the military. So she certainly had a very strong understanding and interest in everything related to the war. She issued appeals to get started for equipment for the house and hospital. And this example is from the Irish Independent from the 6th of March 1917, where she asks that all kind friends would help her to equip the new Red Cross hospital for our wounded soldiers at the Hermitage Lucan, which I have been privileged to open. And she describes it as an empty house for which gifts and loans will be most welcome, to show gratitude to the brave fellows who have suffered so much at the front, that we may live at home in peace and comfort. So it's quite a detailed article. As you can see here, she outlines that they've already received £100 from the Joint Committee Fund. They also have wheeled invalid chairs, gramophones, records, chaise longue, various other items, but she has some specific requirements and she is looking for various domestic goods, but also a piano, a billiard table and a pig. The term shell shock had only fairly recently been coined at this stage of the war, and there was still varying levels of understanding. The report by the Joint Committee suggested that the storm and stress of war had acted on impressionable nervous natures, which in ordinary life would be unlikely ever to break down. They also looked at those who had broken down in consequence of long mental strain without any definite accident. And these were separated out from the cases of those whose condition definitely follows a physical shock or accident. So there were different tiers in their opinion. It was considered that it was something that affected the physical. There was less understanding really about the psychological aspects. However, with the knowledge they had at the time, the serene and picturesque setting of the Hermitage would likely have been considered an ideal kind of environment to facilitate a recovery where one was possible. Keeping the men active and engaged in daily life was crucial, while still receiving care and rest. It was considered a combination that was vital to their rehabilitation. It appears that it was fairly common practice for some convalescing soldiers of various nationalities to be sent to Ireland at this time. Many facilities in Britain were at capacity, so we can't say for sure which nationalities stayed here. We know one definite British soldier was in attendance at the Hermitage, and he's been identified through newspaper reports for his bravery at the front. It's something I'm looking into in more detail at the moment because there were over 370 patients who stayed at the Hermitage during its term, so there are bound to be remarkable stories and insights out there. So if you know any specifics about the men who stayed at the Hermitage, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Volunteers were really the lifeblood of the organisations in running the auxiliary hospitals, and they were organised into civilian voluntary aid detachments, or VADs for short, and really women played such a major role in the work that was carried out on a day-to-day basis. Efforts were made by people across all walks of life and status. Here in this picture we can see the Honourable Florence Barrie with the Red Cross emblem, and she's ably supported by the matron, Miss Amy Moffat, and nurse, Mrs. A. Skipworth, amongst others. It's likely that acting surgeons and doctors visited the hospital as they were required. The British Red Cross website has very comprehensive records of their VADs, their volunteers, and I've been able to compile those that mention Lucan in any capacity. So that may be people who lived elsewhere but for some time volunteered at the hospital, but much more so it would be local women who lived in the area. So you'll see in the coming slides some specific details. I won't talk through those slides, but you can have a look and see if you recognise any of the names. This is an example of a VAD card and a very recognisable name in the area. It's Christina Shackleton of Annaliffe Mills. She gave 1 day a week to nursing duties, and these VAD cards are up on the British Red Cross website for the people that you'll see covered in the grid that I've compiled over the next 3 slides. The War Office supplied a grant per man staying in these auxiliary hospitals, but additional funds were always required, and a number of months after the hospital opened, a very prestigious event was hosted to fundraise. And here we can see a lovely piece of history. It's a commemorative medal from the Grand Fete of 1917. This was a picture that appeared in the Lucan newsletter, and I believe it was sent in by the person who owns the medal. Which is really lovely. You can see that there was a horse jumping competition and garden fete, and it ran over 2 days in September of 1917. The advance publicity remarked on the fact that shell shock was one of the most elusive and difficult forms of casualty, and it suggested that a positive condition at this time could influence the future life of happiness of many gallant soldiers who have looked into the mouth of hell in order that we might be saved. It was a 2-day event and very well advertised in advance. Lucan was already a very popular destination for day trippers, and additional trams were put on specifically for the event. There was horse jumping competitions, including a military one. For everybody then, there was boating, golf putting, shooting galleries, and several concerts, one by the Royal Irish Fusiliers Band. Grand prizes included a very massive silver cup, and there were also financial prizes in the horse jumping competition. Reportedly, there was a glorious weather and a large attendance. I believe there was also a dance on at the Spa Hotel, and a lawn tennis tournament had to be postponed for some reason. Was held at a later date elsewhere. The men of the Hermitage also had a stand at the fete, and they sold items that they had made. Very much VIPs in attendance at this. You can see the list of names here in this article. Again, very many distinguished patrons, which made the work of supporting the auxiliary hospitals their primary focus. So as well as keeping the men active in their day-to-day life, keeping them entertained seems to have been a high priority, and a number of concerts and music recitals and variety shows were put on a regular basis. We can see that on one occasion 65 patients were reported to have watched a show, and this example of a write-up on one of the variety shows covers the fact that there is nothing possible is left undone to make the stay of the boys as pleasant as possible. Keeping up morale was a key focus, and this included the concerts that we mentioned earlier on, but also visits, including this example, which shows the group of nursing staff and patients on the occasion of the Viceregal visit to this Hermitage hospital, which is devoted to cases of shell shock. Again, this is from the South Dublin Library's Local Studies online collection. And the article from the Irish Times of the 17th July 1918 recounts how Viscount French from the Viceregal Lodge in the Phoenix Park attended, and it was reported that a guard of honour was furnished by several of the patients as His Excellency made a tour of all the departments, and as he passed through the wards spoke words of cheer to many of the patients. This is another great photo, and it illustrates the visit by Lady Wimborne, who we're told made an inspection of the institution, in which there are 60 beds maintained by voluntary subscriptions. If you get a chance to have a look at the names there listed at the end of that, you'll see very senior VIPs of the time and high-ranking military officers. The show described in the article to the left there gives some insights into the fun and jovial aspect to the entertainment. It seems to have been a comedy sketch on this occasion. By Christmas of 1918, the armistice had been signed just recently, the month before, marking the end of years of ferocious fighting. The Christmas season at the Hermitage appears to have been a bountiful affair, but some soldiers remained in situ past this time, and a letter that Florence Barrie issued, a letter of thanks printed in the Irish Times of March 1919, outlines the reason being that the men of the Hermitage are chiefly nerve and shell shock cases who stay with us a long time. She recounts here that there have been 378 patients so far cared for, and that the hospital had been requested to remain open to cater for the patients still in their care. In that same letter of thanks, benefactors were acknowledged for providing regular supplies of food such as vegetables, eggs and meat throughout the years. Festive food donated at Christmas time also included grouse, ham, turkey and venison, plus seasonal treats such as Christmas pudding, barm brack and creme de menthe. Other gifts included tickets to a pantomime, vouchers for the tram, which were supplied by the Dublin and Lucan Railway Company, who appeared to have been very supportive of the hospital throughout its time, and then personal items such as cigarettes, magazines, stamps, slippers and mittens. We can see here that efforts were still being made to keep the men active into the new year, and there's a request here for hockey sticks required for the wounded soldiers at HermitageShellShock Hospital. By the May of 1919, the hospital was set to close and an auction of the hospital contents was held on 30th of May 1919. It was heavily advertised in advance, and it included domestic items such as bedsteads, wool mattresses, kitchen chairs, mirrors, curtains and linen, cutlery and china, and then the more unusual and quite specific outdoor recreation hut 20 by 20 feet, also livestock such as 10 white Yorkshire pigs, Belgian hares, Flemish giant rabbits with hutches, and a 5-seater 1914 Argyll motor car. I think all of these really offer an intriguing glimpse into the daily lives of the men. I wonder where all the items ended up. This series of photographs is titled Lucan Hospital Demobs. So as the men were demobilising and leaving the hospital, the photographs show the auction, and they're quite joyful scenes. We see that the matron, Miss Moffat, bought a little dog as a souvenir of the hospital, and also pictured is the last picnic on the lawn as the nursing staff wave farewell to the departing soldiers. After the war in 1920, the War Office issued commemorative scrolls to venues such as the Hermitage. It's not known if these were sent to venues in Ireland, and if the Hermitage would have received one at this time. Key staff were publicly commended for their efforts, and the wording of the scrolls is as such. During the Great War of 1914 to 1919, this building was established and maintained as a hospital for British sick and wounded. The Army Council, in the name of the nation, thank those who have rendered to it this valuable and patriotic assistance in the hour of its emergency, and they desire also to express their deep appreciation of the wholehearted attention which the staff of this hospital gave to the patients who were under their care. The war has once again called upon the devotion and self-sacrifice of British men and women, and the nation will remember with pride and gratitude their willing and inestimable service. The end of the war saw the start of a difficult transition for many soldiers, and likely for shell-shock patients more than most. What can be said, though, is that whatever later life brought these men, the Hermitage had provided a safe haven when it was most needed. The care, concern and empathy shown to the men seems apparent in the way they were provided for by the local community. The ultimate legacy can now be appreciated for the sanctuary the Hermitage offered these men who called it home at their most vulnerable time. And do you know more about the story of the Hermitage? I'm aware of this important needlework piece which is very well cared for in the local community. I'm wondering if there are any other artefacts from the hospital. I'd be delighted to hear from anybody who has information. No doubt there are gaps and possibly some errors in the piece that I've just presented, and I would be more than happy to hear from people with their own stories and tales about the men of the Hermitage. We'd love to hear from you, and our email is oldlucan@gmail.com, or you can get in touch via our Facebook page. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation today.